On April 7th, 2026, the world was holding its breath. Seriously. Tensions between the US and Iran had been simmering for weeks, and now they were at a full boil. A final deadline was just hours away, and war felt, well, it felt pretty much inevitable.
And then, this dropped. An absolutely stunning post from the American president. A direct threat to wipe an entire civilization off the map. You can just imagine leaders around the world scrambling. Was this just talk, or was he about to do the unthinkable?
And then, with the clock basically at zero, something incredible happened. Just 90 minutes, that's it, 90 minutes before it all kicked off, word comes out, a sudden 2-week ceasefire. The world, for a moment, pulled back from the brink.
So you have to ask, right? How on earth did we get this close to all-out war? And maybe the more important question now is, with this ceasefire being so shaky, what happens next? So let's get into it, starting with what's actually at stake here.
Okay, first things first, we need to understand why this matters so much. Beyond just the politics and the military moves, the real-world cost of this conflict is massive, both for the people living there and, honestly, for the entire planet. So, in just about 50 days of fighting, more than 4,000 people were killed. And look, it's easy to hear a number like that and let it wash over you, but these aren't just statistics. That's thousands of families completely torn apart. And when you actually break those numbers down, the picture gets even clearer, and it is just devastating. The vast majority of the people who died were civilians in Lebanon and Iran. It really paints a stark picture of the immense human toll on the ground.
But as horrible as all that is, there was another threat looming, one that was frankly even more terrifying. 4 bombs were dropped near Iran's only nuclear power plant. If one of those had been a direct hit, we could have been looking at a Chernobyl-level disaster.
I mean, listen to what the Prime Minister of Qatar said about that possibility. A leak wouldn't just be an Iranian problem. It would poison the entire Gulf. His words, no water, no fish, nothing. A total generational catastrophe.
So that brings us back to the big question. How did things spiral out of control so fast that a nuclear disaster was even on the table? Well, the timeline shows it was a frighteningly quick slide from a few incidents to a direct ultimatum.
It all happened so fast, it's dizzying. It really kicked off with a U.S. attack and a deadline in late March, but the real flashpoint was April 3rd. Iran shoots down a U.S. fighter jet, which leads to this wild Special Forces rescue mission, and then a series of ignored deadlines that just kept ratcheting up the tension until we were right at the very edge. And you know what happens when deadlines get ignored, right? The talk gets tougher. The threats started shifting away from purely military targets to civilian infrastructure. We're talking power plants and bridges, things that people rely on every single day to live. And along with those threats, the language used went to a really dark place. President Trump called Iranians animals, a statement that immediately set off major alarm bells for international observers. That's the kind of dehumanizing language that can precede horrible atrocities.
And here's why that kind of talk is so dangerous. It's not just words. The UN Secretary General, legal experts, they all immediately jumped in to say, hey, wait a minute. What you're threatening to do right now, that is, by definition, a war crime under international law.
So this brings us back to that 11th hour ceasefire. With the world bracing for impact, there was this frantic, totally chaotic scramble for a diplomatic solution happening behind the scenes.
And the country that stepped in to mediate was, for a lot of people, a total surprise. The breakthrough came from Pakistan. They reportedly used a direct line of communication between their top general and President Trump to hammer out that 2-week truce.
So everyone breathes this huge sigh of relief, right? But here's the thing. A ceasefire is just hitting the pause button. It doesn't actually solve the fundamental problems. And this peace process, well, it ran into trouble almost immediately. And man, did it run into trouble fast. The official peace talks in Islamabad, they collapsed in less than 24 hours. The two sides were just worlds apart. I mean, look at this. The U.S. wanted a 20-year stop on all nuclear activity. Iran offered 5 years, and only if all sanctions were lifted. That gap was just way too big to bridge. And if that wasn't bad enough, things got even more chaotic. Just hours after the ceasefire was announced, Israel launched major strikes in Lebanon. U.S. and Israeli officials claimed Lebanon wasn't part of the deal, but that was the exact opposite of what Pakistan, the country that brokered the deal, had announced. It just threw the whole thing into total confusion.
So that's how we got to where we are right now. A confusing, messy patchwork of temporary deals, blockades, and ticking clocks that has the whole region just completely on edge.
Okay, so let's try to untangle this because it's pretty complicated. You've got the main US-Iran ceasefire that's about to expire, a totally separate and shorter Israel-Lebanon truce, an ongoing US naval blockade, and failed peace talks. It's an incredibly unstable situation.
And this is the key thing to remember. We are not talking about long-term solutions here. Not even close. We're looking at a couple of very short, separate ceasefires. It really just feels like everyone is kicking the can down a very short road.
And this is the immediate danger. The main ceasefire, the big one that pulled the world back from the brink in the first place, is set to end on April 22nd. The clock is officially ticking again.
Which leads everyone back to the same terrifying question. With diplomacy pretty much dead in the water and the truce about to expire, what happens next?
When you boil it all down, it really comes to these three huge unknowns. Can they somehow pull a last-minute deal out of a